Welcome, everyone, to In the Hot Seat. For our repeat viewers, thank you for joining us again. If you're new to the show, every 2 weeks we put industry experts and our customers in the hot seat for a lively discussion, debate, maybe a little discourse as we humanize the digital experience. All aspects of the customer life cycle are up for discussion, as well as technologies used throughout each phase of the journey. So, Thomas, what are we up to today? I mean, this is the fourth in our multi-part CX series, so should be an interesting day. But I saw you put something in the banter discussion points for us before we bring them in. So I'm just curious what you were thinking about tariffs and dynamic pricing. That's an interesting subject.
Let me start what I think about tariffs.
Well, I mean, we probably don't have that long in the show to go through that.
The combination actually makes up for something that is exciting on one hand, but also dangerous on the other hand, because tariffs open up a window for businesses to hide their dynamic pricing or make it dynamic in the sense of adding the tariff and some. And this is probably something that makes price optimization, our today's topic, as well as dynamic pricing, which gives it a very negative image, which is probably not warranted.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because I did read the article you put in there, and it is a smokescreen. If you could use it, I mean, it is. There's no question that that's true, right? You could. The world's distracted enough focusing on tariffs that if your prices, you move to dynamic or you do optimization or just raise them. I mean, that's going to be easy to justify in the short term, anyway. I guess.
Right. That's true. But still, there's let's say a negative connotation to it, because if we are saying price optimization, what's the optimization formula that is used, and who benefits of the optimization? And the cynic in me now says, not the customer.
Yeah, well, I mean, we're going to get into this, I know, but it depends on your definition of optimization, right? Who are we optimizing for? Are we trying to optimize for the experience from a customer perspective, or are we optimizing so as a business I can make more money, or maybe both?
Yeah, or maybe both. Well, if there is more experience for the customer, customers likely are willing to pay a bit more.
Yeah,
better service, better price. That is a very common theme, and it's justifiable. But what I just went through on another notion, bad service for a high price. It's also price optimization.
I'm not sure the word optimization works in that direction, but maybe. I mean, they won't have optimizing.
They won't have repeat business, that's for sure.
Well, there is that, I guess.
To get into this topic about which we can talk the whole day without being the real experts on it, let's bring an expert.
There's an idea.
Well, so let's introduce John Bruno. He is the Vice President of Strategy at PROS. PROS is a provider of AI-powered commerce solutions with a price optimization history. So, the right guy to talk to. Now, he is quite the experienced leader in product and marketing and go-to-market strategies, and he basically focused on shaping the future of digital buying and selling at PROS. So, having said that, I could continue on that one significantly longer as well, but then the time is over. So it's probably better to get into it. But what's the definition of price optimization?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I love kind of the back and forth of how you each started. But for us at PROS, right, we look at price optimization as, finding the right price for the right customer at the right time, right? I think as folks hear the word optimization or optimal, it has connotations. Some of
Mm.
those connotations are positive. Some of those connotations can be negative. But we believe that if you're able to actually find that intersection point of those three things, what you're able to do is better align with customer expectations, better keep up to speed with market dynamics, and achieve the right business goals. And those business goals, while you can easily look towards like, I'm going to make more money, or I'm going to widen my
That's
margin.
a goal.
Well,
Great business goals might be more loyal customers who come back and spend more money with you over time too. So there's a lot of different objectives you could use price optimization for.
which objectives do you usually see?
It's a great question. So what we usually see are organizations trying to drive revenue, trying to improve margin, or trying to drive conversion. And what's important about those three things is, how you do that isn't always the same. Not always raising prices. I think, as you mentioned, right, you raise a price to a certain point, you might turn away customers. And I think over the past couple of years, we've probably seen plenty of examples of that. While I didn't do it, I saw the email from Netflix earlier this year, and I was like, you know what? I don't think that price point is worth the service that they're delivering. And so there is an inflection point where, yes, you might close that sale, but you're not going to get a seat at the table or an opportunity to win the next part of that business.
I mean, it's kind of back to this argument we've had for years. We said, the rule of thumb was, look, if we're delivering value and we get value, that's an equal equation, and that's good. But we were talking about the definitions at first, and it seems to me the extremes lead you down a bad path, no matter which direction you're looking, right? I mean, for the customer, optimum price is a completely different thing than a price optimized for a business or whatever. But so the definition's one of those issues, I think, and how does that reconcile between those two viewpoints? And then, and this is, I mean, there's a bit of a paradox. Can you really optimize a single price for both parties, or is there always some sort of compromise? And of course, I sort of think that would be in the vendor's favor, but maybe not. I mean, maybe there's a better way.
Yeah, I'll give you maybe a counterintuitive point, right? I think people think optimal and they think about, that spectrum in terms of one end of the extreme or the other. I'm either going to make a lot of money and it's going to be wildly profitable for me, or I'm going to give a screaming hot deal to a customer and maybe even lose a few bucks on it. And I think what optimal really boils down to is the uncommon word you hear in the context of AI conversations is what's fair, right? And I think fairness is where a lot of organizations that win find themselves winning. Yeah. I'm going to deliver something to you where you have an idea of what to expect. Your notion of value aligns to the product or service that I'm selling. And now you become a vendor, right? We talk about B2B in particular, things like customer loyalty, right? I want to have trust that the vendor or supplier that I'm working with is going to be fair with me at every stretch of the way. And I'm going to spend more money with those vendors.
I mean, it seems like it is back to that simple value for value idea, right? And what am I giving? What am I getting? And are both of those enough that it makes me want to participate? But one of the things underneath this that strikes me, though, as I was listening to that, is that there's also sort of this difference in each business goal. What outcome do I want, right? Am I trying to encourage repeat business? Am I trying to, optimize this to get the most margin? Am I, whatever? But it seems like it's related to business goals and strategy a lot too.
Oh, absolutely. And those business goals and strategies go well beyond the things that we've talked about so far. What if you are starting to go to market in a brand new territory, brand new region, and you want to win more market share? That might not be the most profitable business to get into. Over time, it may turn into that. Or what happens if there is a market where you are the known leader, your brand is recognized for the products and services that you provide, but now there's a new competitor coming into that market? How do you manage all of the affects that competitor has on your space? How does it change the perceived value equation we just talked about a moment ago? The list goes on and on and on. What if you want to, expand your footprint with a given set of customers into part of your product portfolio they've never bought into before? All of these things have different kind of inputs and outputs.
There's another point involved in there, which is the value exchange. Because usually, if it's not necessarily a usage-based billing approach, the customer pays first and then may get value or not. How does that get into, or well, perceived value? Let's say get value, very likely yes, but maybe not the wanted one over time. So how does that get into price optimization strategies? How can that get, with or without AI, get figured out?
Yeah, I think it boils down to what specific attributes of that deal the customer sees value in. And it's very easy to talk about pricing and think of like, I'm going to sell you this product at this price.
Mm.
In most of these scenarios, there's a lot more complex than that. It may not be one product. You may actually be, purchasing off a quote of 1,000, 5,000, 10,000 products.
Yeah.
So you might want to ebb and flow on the price of one in favor of the other, right? Really lean into the things that the customer sees value in. And it's not terribly uncommon to even look at that in the context of what we've probably all experienced, in the B2C world, right? Maybe there's a limited product release. Maybe there's less inventory at launch time. And while you might not necessarily see it show up from a retail standpoint, but in secondary markets, marketplaces, things of that nature, you see the free market at play. And I think that's what a lot of price optimization allows, our customers and anybody using tools like ours to accomplish, which is how do you solve for the questions that the free market would otherwise define and do so at scale with precision and in an agile fashion? How do you do it quickly and get it right, accounting for all of those factors that determine how much someone's willing to pay for something or what the elasticity of a given product is?
Mm-hmm.
It seems like when you talk about that there's this sort of push-pull here around, from a customer perspective, around dynamic or optimized, because they aren't the same thing, right? I mean, they could be, but they might not be. So
A lot of shades of gray.
Yeah, I mean, I guess that's true. But how do you implement dynamic pricing, or maybe how do you decide that you want to go for a dynamic pricing scheme versus a set but optimized price? And it seems like there's some risk associated with that too, right? And I remember years ago some weird thing, and actually you guys might have been responsible, but that airline prices went up if you were on a Mac versus an IBM PC or a regular Microsoft PC, because they figured as Apple people were much wealthier, so we'd pay more.
Well, on the other hand, they probably spent all their money on their gear and don't have anything.
Well, that's probably a fairer
That's the same
assessment, but that's probably a much fairer assessment.
Yeah, so I can say definitively that we were not responsible for that. We can get into the different kind of data points and attributes that we use for optimized pricing. But I guess going back to the topic of dynamic versus optimized, I don't see it as the or Boolean, but oftentimes the and, right? And so especially customers leveraging our technology, yes, there is a strong role that AI plays in it. But that being said, you don't want to necessarily skew too far to one end or the other of the extremes. And so oftentimes that AI, you can almost think about it being governed by a set of guardrails, right? Some business logic you want to put into place so that it doesn't go too far to one side or the other. So when I think about dynamic, the way that I think about it is pricing that can adapt and evolve much faster than the traditional methods of human Excel-based analysis, making recommendations, putting those through, highly governed workflows. The next thing you know, you're talking about a week or so later before any of that actually gets updated. I wouldn't call that dynamic. Now, when we look at optimized pricing, right, that's the usage of artificial intelligence to find that intersection of right price, right customer, right channel, so on and so forth. And optimization is a good tool to use to make pricing more dynamic. So it's a tool in the arsenal. I don't necessarily think it's in conflict with dynamic pricing.
Interesting. I mean, I guess there's sort of this question from a customer perspective of it is, how do I know the difference between optimization and exploitation, right? If I feel exploited, then that's bad. But optimized, it doesn't, as long as I'm getting the value I perceived, that's fine, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think customer exploitation now is come much more to the forefront. And Thomas, I think you mentioned it earlier, right? And Michael, you reinforced it, which is, when there's externalities, these external forces like tariffs that are causing companies to rethink their pricing strategy. Well, how much of it are they, just simply passing through the tariff, or how much of it are they being opportunistic? And whether warranted or not, a lot of the sentiment out there is, that prices are being gouged. You saw even with the past administration, topics pop up around, regulating and having more governance over the prices you see in grocery stores, things of that nature. So I think there's a healthy dose of skepticism that's out there. But at the end of the day, kind of going back to it, if you're delivering the right price for that right customer, they're going to feel comfortable with it. They're going to keep coming back. And I think the problem lies in, how do you get the exact right price? And if you do get it right, the skepticism starts to go away.
Now, the right price for the right customer, that has a dimension that we didn't talk about yet.
Easy for you to say.
If Mike and I are customers, we sometimes talk to each other. Well, customers do that. And if we now identify that we are paying vastly different prices, that sort of is eroding trust as well, and also the perception of value for the one who paid the higher price. So how can that get realigned also in a sense of, well, Esteban Kolsky doesn't like that word in a business environment, but fairness?
Yeah. Well, I guess it's important to kind of take a step back in terms of how we think about optimized pricing. We don't use customer specific data. And that might sound entirely counterintuitive. Like, wouldn't you want to know that person who spends more money on a MacBook Pro versus take your preferred, OEM PC manufacturer? We don't do that. I will say it's 2025. AI has progressed tremendously. Do the capabilities exist to be able to do that out there in the world? They absolutely do. It would be irresponsible to say that doesn't exist elsewhere. But for us, we really focus on a lot of the economic conditions, right? What does my supply or inventory look like? I think a lot of folks recognize Pros from its background in airlines, right? Well, if you think about a flight, going from point A to point B on a particular date out there in the future, how many seats are on that flight. And I think what a lot of folks perceive is like, oh, well, I logged in on a Wednesday morning and the fare was really low, and I came back on Thursday, and they probably saw that I was searching for it, so they raised the price.
It does feel like that.
It does, right? But in practice, what you're typically seeing in those situations is the amount of available time between now and that flight taking off has shrunk, and also the dynamics around available capacity on that flight have changed. Right. And you could look at things like, fare classes and seat selections and things of that nature as well. So it is a lot more dynamic, but what you're doing is you're infusing a lot more of the microeconomics of that flight into the prices that are being provided out there. I'll give you a good example in a related industry. Think about transportation and logistics. And imagine I'm sending a shipping container from Europe over to the US, right? If it's going to leave 45 days from now, and I've almost booked up all of the capacity in that container, I've got a healthy runway in front of me. Maybe I want to price the remaining capacity at a premium and just see what happens. Yeah. But conversely, if that container is going to leave next week and it's almost entirely empty, that container is going to leave regardless of what's on it. So I might be better off actually driving the price down to collect some more of that revenue for a sunk cost that's already in place. So you're seeing a lot more of those kind of dynamics that you and I and others can kind of solve for on a one-off basis. But once you extrapolate out kind of the complexity of that, well, what if you're not sending one shipping container? What if you're sending 10,000? And what if they're all leaving on the same day? Humans simply can't keep up with that. So our approach is, how do we mimic the best human decision-making at scale while still providing the human oversight and governance over the recommendations that come out of the AI model?
Now, transportation is a good topic. I just had a supremely bad experience. Supremely bad. Yeah.
I didn't mean to touch a nerve.
They probably didn't use Pros, but they're actually too cheap for that and too greedy. But looking into the decision making and driving up and down and ethics, what are some guardrails that can prevent price optimization into moving into something that I'd call exploitation of the customer? Because especially if it comes to moving stuff, well, there are behaviors like, well, we don't unpackage this before we have received full payment. And if it's damaged after, well, your problem. Our claims process goes into nirvana. So this is a good example of missing ethical guardrails. But what should be some good ones in there, especially when pricing and price optimization, dynamic pricing in general, happens sort of automatically?
Yeah, well, I think even if you remove technology from the equation right now, a topic that came up earlier was tariffs. And I think we're kind of at this really interesting mark right now in global trade policy, right? It was what, 6.5 or so months ago where these tariffs first got announced. And one of the things you see a lot of businesses doing is they were afraid to pass on the cost of the tariffs to the consumer. They weren't sure if the tariffs were going to stand for the long haul. They weren't sure if the tariffs were merely a negotiation tool that weren't going to last. And so what you saw a lot of organizations do was actually basically implement their own business guardrails. I'm not going to pass on the tariff to the customer, at least right now. Now, fast forward 6 or so months later, well, it looks like that kind of world of introducing and rolling back and introducing tariffs, seems to be more commonplace, and it might be here to stay for a while, right? At least a number of years. And so what a lot of those organizations are doing is 6 months later, starting to include the impact of tariffs into those pricing changes. And I think the industry you can probably point to the clearest on that is the automotive world. Well, Mercedes-Benz and Porsche, I'm picking German companies for you, are saying, hey, no, we're not going to change prices for this model year. They're focused on the customer experience. But now that it looks like that's here to stay, they don't have other options. So they use that business guardrail of, we don't want to introduce too much fluctuation, but now it's an existential crisis. That fluctuation is here to stay. That's the new normal. And so now they've got to be able to adapt and be transparent in how their pricing strategies evolve moving forward. Even saw Amazon take early steps. They eventually rolled it back, but to show the impact of a tariff on the goods sold on the Amazon marketplace.
Yeah. It's interesting because I mean, if you think about the environment, is that uncertainty, and I guess the same thing could be true of pricing, right? If pricing's too dynamic, then it creates uncertainty, which makes me as a consumer either want to wait to see if the price goes down or go really quickly because I'm afraid the price is going to go up. And that's this anxiety almost is like, how do you build confidence into a system like that? I mean, rather than take the risk of erosion.
Yeah, it's a good question. And so I think if you kind of look at even the history of pros, like we started in the airline world. And I think at least that notion of finite capacity, even if you weren't an economics major or have some sort of advanced degree in economics, you understand that when scarcity is at play, people will pay a premium to reserve their spot. And I think if you look at the trajectory that things like price optimization have taken, right, we've moved from there into a lot of B2B industries. And what's a little bit different about those B2B industries is you might not necessarily be optimizing for a particular sale, but what you might be optimizing for is some other form of commercial agreement, right? What is Michael's pricing going to be for, widgets A, B, and C, assuming he's going to, commit to a certain volume threshold, and let's lock him into that price for the next year. So the next time you come back, what the price is going to be, but it's already negotiated with kind of that notion of what's optimal, as we've defined it earlier, in mind. And now I think what you're starting to see is some B2C brands, retailers, even things like quick service restaurants start to roll out flavors of optimized pricing as well. They're working on marketing it a little bit differently, maybe. It wasn't too long ago where Target said, hey, we're going to provide certain incentives and promotions for folks to shift their purchasing from online to in-store. We want to get people into the store. You also saw restaurants do things to say like, oh man, we get so busy between the hours of noon and 1 p.m. Let's try to move that out. And so you incentivize pricing outside of those windows to normalize the flow of people placing orders coming in and the strain on the restaurants themselves.
Kind of the reverse of surge pricing.
Yeah.
It's like unsurging.
Wasn't there a fast food chain that recently wanted to introduce
Wendy's.
surge pricing?
Yeah, Wendy's was the one that got caught in that one.
Wendy's, I think it was Wendy's. Yeah. So
that was poor marketing. I don't think the Wendy's strategy was poor, but I think the way that they message it and communicate it, which I don't want to diminish, that's extremely, extremely, extremely important. Letting the customer know what's in it for them. I think they missed the mark on their rollout.
Yeah.
I mean, in B2B, that predictability is really important, right? I need to be able to budget, especially if it's recurring or consumable or, whatever that is. So I need that predictability to do my own planning. Otherwise, I am in that place of anxiety, right?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So, and I think even on the topic of like that planning, right? Here we are talking about price optimization, but if you remove the word price from it, what else can you optimize? And if you think about that B2B world in particular, we talked about how does price optimization play into the role of more long-term customer loyalty? What does that customer life cycle actually look like? Well, in some situations, I might want to offer a customer a price incentive to win over their business. For other customers who, may be existing customers, and I think about what that relationship looks like forward, what else might I optimize? I might optimize price, but I may give you less of a discount on price and create a new type of incentive around, a rebate or some other flavor of promotion. So maybe once you buy a certain volume or dollar amount or something of that nature, we're going to give you a kickback. So there's a lot of levers at play. And I think organizations that balance things like pricing, subscription pricing where appropriate, rebates, promotions, tend to be those that will come out on top in the future.
Do you think that businesses do not talk enough about these kinds of strategies that fall into optimization in general? Because as a consequence, if I look around me, around at people that I know, most of them have a negative connotation when they hear price optimization, because they feel like being the target of the optimization.
Yeah.
The payer of the optimization, basically, not the one who gets the benefit of this optimization.
Yeah, it's interesting. And I think it's a visceral reaction. But I got a really interesting data point for you, right? So pros in the airline space has been doing price optimization since the 1980s, right? If you look at, how the government has tracked fares, they really started tracking fares around 1993. And if you look at fares in 1993 relative to today's world, once you're adjusted for inflation, pricing's actually gone down 41% for airfare. Yet we hear optimal and you think someone's trying to, take every nickel and dime out of my wallet for this next transaction. So, there's a number of reasons why those fares have come down. There's more carriers operating, there's greater capacity, there's greater optionality. It's easier to book indirect flights and things of that nature. But again, it's all the economic conditions around purchasing airfare that has led to that result. But at the end of the day, we've actually seen a price decrease over that time period.
Interesting. Probably feeds into the issues that happened around the pandemic and post-pandemic travel too, right? I mean, there was a period of time when things were so disrupted and capacity went way down. And then as they tried to scale back up, they had to deal with that whole like, okay, we don't really have that much capacity, so we would charge more, or there's a reason to charge more anyway. Interesting.
Yeah, you nailed it. You just hit the point that was hidden beneath a lot of the headlines. Right? Airlines didn't know what to do, and they took different planes out of rotation, and they were sitting in hangars. There was a lot less capacity. And then when you think about, okay, well, when do we ramp back up? That too was an unknown, and the cost and operations of ramping back up, getting planes certified. There were a number of layoffs that happened then. So how do you get enough pilots and staff for each flight? It was a major operational and planning ordeal, but we saw higher prices because there was less capacity.
Yeah, still there. Well, sticking to that example, there's this 50s or 60s image that we still have in mind that had airline travel as well. Something
super luxurious in the Pan Am
luxurious,
days.
let's say comfort. Let's say
Yeah,
comfort, you
we've
know?
all disproven that one, I tell you.
Yeah, which it sort of isn't anymore, right? So that of course influences the perception of value received as well. I mean, if I go Ryanair or well, it's Breeze here in the US, then I know what I pay for, right? If I go Delta, then heck, I might not want a Breeze or Ryanair experience. So although I often get it, right? So let's take United, for example. They don't only break guitars, yeah, they also break confidences. So this brings us again into the guardrails and the strategies. So, and perhaps and well, is an algorithmic bias, at least a bias that doesn't help customers perceive value.
Yeah, it could not help customers in their perception of value. But again, I think, when you look at even some of the examples that you provided a moment ago of those different types of carriers, right? I think they'd make the argument that they've given the customers more optionality, right? When you're buying, from a low cost carrier, what they're going to do is they're going to break down, the cost of each of the components of that overall experience. You'll pay one price to get on the plane. You'll pay a different price to choose your seat. You may pay a different price on how you want to, think about the luggage that you bring with you, whether it's a carry-on or a check bag, right? So they're trying to give more optionality to the customers there. And that it's a new dynamic, right? So that might be perceived as, complexity or opaqueness. But again, I think that at the end of the day, it's a combination of your business strategy. So do you want to put rules in place? And now, even if you think about how you or I might use things like large language models and chat GPT and whatnot, you think about like the tone or the level of aggression that you want to have, like how do you want the AI to respond? And in even solutions like ours, you can set that. You can say, well, when it comes time to making AI driven price recommendations, I know what business objective I want to achieve. And in my pursuit of getting to said business objective, I might say, AI, be a little bit more conservative in the steps that you take. Or if I want to get there more quickly, hey, maybe be a little bit more aggressive.
Be polite and assertive, yeah.
Technology can only do so much. So really businesses understanding their customers, understanding their preferences, knowing how much or how little to pull on each of those toggles and what business rules they want to overlay over that to kind of execute on their business strategy is, probably get my wrist slapped for saying it, but that those business levers are going to be more important than the technology you deploy.
I mean, we kind of learned a lesson during the pandemic about supply and demand, and that whole, driven by what we can have access to or do have access to. But it kind of makes me think back, and you mentioned this word a minute ago around transparency. And this is where, I mean, of course, part of that is because we're so deep into the transition into AI that transparency is a really hot topic, but it's truly a hot topic around pricing as well. So how do companies balance that, right? How are you transparent at the same time keeping your own competitive advantage and then providing the customer with an experience that does show a balanced value proposition?
Yeah, so I'll kind of go back to one point I mentioned earlier, which is we're not using customer specific data. So, when you think about that, what truly is driving the relative demand and therefore the relative price of given products? And so we've done a lot in our technology to at least help businesses understand that. And they can then convey that to their customers through a number of different tactics. So I'll make up an example here, but we started talking about, laptops, PCs versus Macs, right? And, what if you found out that the market was seeing a greater demand for rose gold colored PCs, right? If the market is putting a premium on that, should you be able to charge for that premium? And I think our perspective, our customer's perspective, and even the buyer's perspective is yes, right? Now, at some level, the demand will go down if the price point gets too high. But it's those kinds of trade-offs. What does this do to elasticity, to demand, to conversion percentages? And I don't think any one commercial strategy will make every single customer happy, but it's really finding that sweet spot where all those pieces start to come together with those business objectives in mind. And organizations can take different approaches in terms of how they communicate things. I started by saying Netflix was probably a masterclass in terrible communication. I didn't understand what they were doing. I didn't know what additional value I was getting, what type of content they were licensing, what type of content they were creating. All I saw was a price increase. Conversely, I'm a customer of SimpliSafe. This is not an endorsement, but that's what I use for home security. And they sent an email out about 2 weeks ago, and it kind of went in one ear and out the other because it was so inconsequential. The price point I thought was valid. They explained how that pricing was going into R&D, was going into the live service they provide around home monitoring, and it made sense. So I thought nothing of it.
I mean, that kind of goes back to this idea around transparency, though, right? If I understand what's driving this decision, I may not like the fact that the price doubled, but I would understand that the price doubled, and I'd not have to make the decision on whether I wanted to participate in buying that at that price or not. But at least it puts it on me to be able to make my decision based on data versus I'm just trying to figure out why you're trying to gouge me.
Absolutely. All we want is to be able to make informed and educated decisions.
Yeah, makes sense.
We have this balance between revenue now and loyalty. This is, it's almost a dichotomy, right? So you can make a dichotomy out of it. In how far is it possible at all to, in a B2B world, to navigate this dilemma, actually? Because I mean, on one side, there is, for most publicly traded companies, the need, not only the desire, the need to show big numbers soon, combined with the other need that seems to sometimes take a little bit of the backseat to have bigger numbers later, means keep the customer.
You mean businesses don't operate on a quarterly basis?
Well, some of them surely seem to do.
I mean, I think for me, right, we are starting to see that transition to more stability. Right? Even to look at the economy and the stock market right now, you see really safe bets, being heavily invested in right now. And I think businesses too, they want to see safe bets in a world that is just rife with volatility. And so years ago, it used to be, I'm going to create loyalty with my customers by providing them the best price for the services or products that I provide. That loyalty only goes so far until a competitor comes in and offers a better price. Then all of a sudden, your customer's not loyal at all, right? The only thing they're loyal to is their wallet and getting the best price. And so I think what you've seen specifically over the past couple of years, as the world's been increasingly more volatile, is pulling on those different levers I had mentioned earlier. If I can get you as a customer to commit to a certain volume over a certain period of time, you better believe that there are going to be concessions that, as a supplier, a manufacturer, or distributor, I'd be willing to make. So maybe I'll take a haircut on that margin, but I know that the number of units that you're going to buy is going up. And so, my revenue is going to go up by a certain amount. And, having kind of transparency on both sides of that allows two parties to enter into an appropriate commercial relationship. And it's that kind of commercial relationship that we see taking the forefront and growing over time. So you see a lot more of that kind of holistic view of the relationship, as opposed to, how do I win this deal that's right in front of me and get the most revenue or margin in it?
Into which other strategies do you recommend embedding pricing? Because I mean, what you just used as an example, having me commit to a large amount of deliveries or a large volume, or let's take volume of deliveries. That is in negative words, it's creating a lock-in. It's not creating loyalty.
It could.
So how can you use price optimization and surrounding strategies to make me want business with you, which then would be loyalty?
Sure. Yeah, you could do a couple things. You could optimize what those volume discounts look like. So maybe you're not going to commit to something up front, but you know that for the first 100 units, you're going to pay a price of X. For units 101 through 500, you'll pay a price of Y. And for units 501 and up, you'll pay a price of Z. And right, they get more advantageous for the buyer over that period of time. I think that's one. The other that we're seeing become increasingly popular is the use of rebates. So at the end of the day, that calculation can yield the same out-of-pocket expense for you based on the prescribed volume. But you know, as a buyer, that maybe your initial discount won't be there. But if you do end up purchasing the amount that both parties believe you will, you'll get that back in the end. And so I think there are a number of levers at businesses' disposals to navigate these waters and provide the flexibility that the buyer prefers and increasingly demands in these scenarios.
How to combine that with the value exchange equation? Because as said, so usually the value for the vendor comes early and the value for the buyer, well, somewhat later. So, and if that time gap gets shortened, then this is surely conducive for, well, creating trust and creating a relationship out of a transaction. So how, do you deal with that at all
Sure, and you can flip the script too. You can flip the script in a sense where the value is going to come to the buyer first, right? Again, if you're creating a fair and equitable commercial relationship, it should all wash out in the end. But if if I want to go ahead and offer you a significant discount because, we have an agreement that you're going to buy more, well, I might get, let's call it 10% of that commitment in the first quarter that we start doing business. So that's not going to look good for me in my financials. But let's say over the course of a year, let's say it's backloaded, it'll all wash out in the end, right? Again, I guess maybe coming full circle, if you think about this in an airplane analogy, I'm not a pilot, but I've peeked into the cockpit every once in a while, and you see all those different buttons and toggles and levers. It feels like they could do anything they ever wanted to. And it's that kind of control that we're looking to provide to our customers, and also provide them the transparency in terms of what happens if you flip this switch versus the other switch.
I mean, where does this go? So to talk a little bit about, obviously AI is more and more involved in all of these software tools that we use to do this. But what's the future look like? And future with AI, I guess, is, anywhere from a minute to a few weeks or months. But, but I mean, how do you guys look at this? I mean, where do you think this is going, and what should businesses be aware of as they think through this process?
Yeah, so I think I'll start on the business side. So the manufacturer, the supplier, the distributor, the airline, right? We talked about, configuring a solution in such a way where you set it for business objectives, right? Those business objectives aren't a matter of, selecting from a bunch of different drop downs or changing this toggle to that toggle or this radio button. It's natural language, right? And so we see the world of agents playing a very significant role. If I can communicate in natural language what I'm trying to accomplish, and the system configures itself for that objective, that's a win. That's a lot of time savings, a lot of productivity. It allows humans to move on to other and more sophisticated tasks. On the other end, right, if I think about it being from a buyer standpoint, right, there's certain objectives that I have as a buyer. And what if I can communicate those objectives to an agent that's facing me, right? I no longer need to wait on a human being to respond with that first quote. I'm not saying a human will never get involved, but if a buyer can communicate what they're trying to do, maybe minimize their upfront costs, they're happy to pay it down the road, right? Then that agent, knowing what your intended outcome is, can help configure the right solution, that right commercial structure, that combination of all those various commercial levers we talked about earlier, and put it in front of the buyer for reaction.
Yeah, makes sense.
That makes a lot of sense. And I think we could continue for ages. Unluckily, our time's up. So,
Or maybe luckily for some people, I don't know. Depends.
yeah, well, thanks, John. So what I can say for sure is that you did not merely survive the hot seat, so you did better than that. Thanks for this great conversation, and also thanks to everybody who we didn't scare away. So there still are some in the audience. To the audience, if you think that you have what it takes to do as good as John now, let us know, and we'll find the topic. We'd love to hear from you. That's your hot seat episode for today. Thanks so much for being with us this week. I'm Thomas Wieberneit.
I'm Michael Fauscette. Tune in next time for different faces, different topics, and different perspectives as we put somebody else in the hot seat.